Tips for getting the most out of your plugins. Now, here's a really, really good tip. You will, if you've ever bought a piece of hardware, right, and you've got a plugin emulation of the hardware, the manual for the plugin is often not worth reading. I mean, I always try and read a manual for a plugin. I try. You don't always get round to reading a manual for a plugin. Hardware manuals, on the other hand, when you buy a piece of hardware, you sit down with that manual because it's a physical manual. You sit down with it and you read it. And hardware manuals are very, very in-depth. And they give you a lot of information on exactly how to use certain parameters on the hardware. You don't necessarily get that with the plugin. So you don't get that in like the plugin manual. It's not like a duplicate of the manual. Now, for me, when I think about it, is the hardware manuals are really good and they're really in depth, and you get a lot of information from them, and you work out how to use the hardware most effectively, partly from reading the manual as well. So, if an emulation of the hardware in plugin format is emulated, surely the hardware manual is relevant to the plugin. So what I'm getting at here is read the hardware manual on your plugin emulation, because that will translate and transfer from hardware to plugin if the plugin is a good emulation of the hardware. So by reading the hardware manual, you'll gain more insight into visual curves of an EQ. Often in manuals, you will find, like for instance, the SSL Fusion manual. It will tell you the sweet spots for where the optimal kind of positioning is for certain parts of the Fusion. Like, for instance, the stereo widener is best set at number 2. So if you set it at 2, that's kind of the optimal place for the stereo widener to sit. And it is true. And that is a really good starting position. That is where it should sit majority of the time. And that does transfer onto something like the plugin emulation. So it's well worth reading the hardware manual. And you might think, oh, well, I haven't got the hardware manual because I don't own the hardware. All the hardware manuals are online. You can go online, download the PDF, and just have a flick through it. And you'll notice that the hardware manual and the plugin manual are totally different, because I guess in a way they're kind of marketed at different kind of ends of the audio spectrum, I guess. I don't know. Maybe that's why they're different, even when they're emulations. Maybe plugin manuals are a little less in depth because people don't read the plugin manuals, whereas the hardware manuals, I mean, for me, the first thing I do when I get something out of the box is, if the manual's sitting there, I will flick through the manual and I will have a read through the manual. And you don't necessarily do that with a plugin. So I mean, there's a little tip there with for plugin emulations. It only obviously works with plugin emulations because it has to be an emulation of the hardware for the hardware manual to be relevant. So here you go. That's a nice little tip for you.